Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. My name is Christian.
I'm Izzy.
And I'm Alice.
And we're all little
NeuroSpicy. You gotta stop with the finger guns.
I think the finger guns are great.
Okay.
You know what?
You would.
You need to...
What do you think about the finger guns? Let us know in the comments down below.
Let us know in the comments if you like the finger guns, or if you're like Izzy and are a little party pooper. So today what we're going to be talking about in our episode is we're just going to be kind of talking about life as being college students who are on the neurodivergent spectrum, and what that's like being in an institution that's really created for neurotypical people. Christian, I know you have a lot to say on this topic, so let it rip. Let this baby glow.
I first became a college student in August of 2020. It was a very interesting time for the state of the world at the height of the COVID pandemic, and it put a lot of things into perspective for me. Social distancing measures were in full effect at the time. We weren't allowed to have people over in our dorm, and I was very fortunate to live with three roommates that were also friends carried over from high school, but there still was a lot of time for introspection for me. I'd normally get overwhelmed just like checking COVID statistics every day or just seeing the news on my Twitter feed, and I'd often go out on a walk. It almost felt like post-apocalyptic because even in broad daylight on a school day, because classes were held remotely, there would be zero people on campus. Like, it was almost like winning the lottery if I saw somebody else, donning a mask with their little hand sanitizer walking around campus with me. It was a very strange time for me. In terms of my education, I struggled with maintaining complete effective autonomy as like a newly adult. My parents were very much helicopter parents, especially my mom. She would check my grades. She would log into my Canvas, and every day, multiple times, because I would always forget my homework. Like, as soon as I get home from school, like, school's done. Why am I going to think about school? So I'd sit there, I'd be playing Minecraft or whatever. My mom would be like, "Did you do your homework?" "Oh yeah," and then I'd knock it out real quick. But I didn't have a system like that, and I found that I was forgetting about so many different assignments, even though I was being reminded of them from my teachers, of course, during my remote meetings. And I was just seeing the missing assignments pile up. And Canvas has this incredible feature where you can test out your grades before they're done, so you can figure out like your cumulative course grade after testing out, what you got on certain assignments. So more often than not, I'd put 0 and be like, okay, move from a 93 to a 92. I'll just forget about that one. And then I do another one. I don't do it. Another one. I don't do it. And it adds up very quickly. And I just started feeling so overwhelmed with all the school I had, even though, like, objectively speaking, it was so much less work than I had to do in high school because of the rigid system I was already in. All my classes were the exact same schedule. My parents would always ride me on what to do. Just everything was kind of laid out for me, and this was the first time where that was not the option. I had to be responsible for myself, and I really struggled with it. It got to the point where I was so overwhelmed I wouldn't even check my Canvas for like weeks to even months on end. It was just very much just like an out of sight, out of mind sort of thing. Like, if I wasn't thinking about it, I wasn't worried about it, even though I was still thinking about it and worried about it. I would just sit there and watch TV all day, every day. I had nothing better to do, and I would just worry about all the school I'm not doing while I'm not doing it. Overall, I just felt very powerless and scatterbrained, and it took me a good couple of years to figure out how to actually like motivate myself and become self-reliant in school now that I don't have a rigid system to follow.
Yeah, I totally get that. I think a lot of people struggle with that transition from a very big, like, rigid system to not, and I think it's, especially if you have ADHD, because you can really struggle with that, like, inattentiveness during, like, your lectures and stuff that might have been a little easier in school, because school, like, there was homework in school, but a lot of times it was, you go to school and you leave, and, you mostly have the time after. You could be doing homework for, like, an entire day in college. You could have assignments pile up in a way where it's like, okay, cool, we need to sit down and do homework for 6 hours.
Oh, it's crippling. Like, and I had a really similar experience with that. I mean, we have all used that Canvas grade checker.
Yeah.
You're like, okay, if I get a 50,
do I pass?
Yes. Okay, see, I'll be fine, because I'm not going to get lower than a 50.
I just got to get a 95 on my final, and I don't have to do any of my homework.
Yeah, Maria. And I also have, like, really strict parents, especially my mother. Like, she used to get, when I was younger, notifications if I got anything below a B.
Jesus.
On an assignment. And from the age from 2nd to 7th grade, she worked at my school. So, like, if I screamed loud enough, I went to a really small charter school, she would hear me. Like, it wasn't that hard, and even when she left, she, like, was friends with a lot of teachers. I went to an open house, and they were all like, we're watching you, like, just because your mom's not here. Like, I was
terrifying.
like, mind you, I was an innocent little bean. I don't know what you're talking about. Okay, now, no, but, like, then, I went into college with a chemical engineering degree.
How'd that go?
Well, we're not in it anymore.
Yeah, I see.
We transitioned very quickly into communications after my first year, after failing calculus not once, but twice. And they politely asked me to leave STEM. Don't blame them. Didn't like it.
It's okay. It happens to the best of us. Yeah, I actually had kind of not an opposite experience, but my parents were like, I don't want to say neglectful, but like they were very hands off. Like, my mom was like, you do your own thing. And I did good in my grades. I would get great grades. I really struggled to make friends, though. I think a lot of the way that... I also came in during COVID, so it was a little weird, but a lot of the way that, like, campuses tend to create meetups for students can be very, like, based around, like, neurotypical social norms in terms of just, like, you know, I would go there, suddenly I'm overstimulated because there's, like, 5 million lights and, like, 20 million people, and I'm just like, what's going on? It's like a flashbang. Because I just felt like I did not human. It felt like an alien walking into, like, a foreign, like, land, or, like, an alien walking into, like, a different planet, just being like, I don't know what's going on here. Y'all are strange to me. I remember I would just sit and kind of, like, watch other students and be like, what are they doing? But I actually do have advice for, at least with making friends. Like, my advice, find a club that can be based online, like Discord or something, especially if you have, like, nerdier interests. Like, mine was our TTRPG club, and make friends via the internet, and then you can kind of transition that into real life if you play your cards right. I made most of my friends through a D&D game from that club that just kind of spiraled into, like, a really close friend group. So if you have trouble with, like, meeting people in person and, like, socializing and stuff, that's really good.
I also struggle with that, even, like, growing up. We touched on this a little bit earlier, but not to your extent. And I think that's solely because I at least always had my best friend. I met her really young, and I've known her since we were 8.
Mm-hmm.
So we went to the same school from first, and actually until now. We started out going to the same school in first grade all the way to high school and now into college. And I think just because I had, like, her and a few other close friends, I didn't feel as neglected in school. Not so much in that, like, I still felt weird and, like, unaccepted, but a lot of times because I had, like, other friends with me, it felt more like I just wasn't popular versus, like, oh, I was, like, entirely different, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I get that.
But as for, like, making friends in college, I really had to, like, ignore every instinct in myself to, like, run away. And probably around my sophomore year, or, like, late into freshman, I was like, all right, you actually got to talk to someone. And I would try to at least just say hi to someone I, like, kind of sat next to in one of my classes to see if anything came of that. I did make a few friends.
Oh, good for you. Y'all are the only people I hung out with in my classes outside of class.
I feel that. Yeah, me kind of. Me too. I didn't make many friends in classes.
Hey, calculus bonds a person.
You got any advice for how to succeed?
Words for the folks. You just be like,
honestly, no, I would say just...
Honestly, no.
No. Still struggling out here. I mean, most of my friends I've kept since, like, high school age, you know. I make a lot of, like, forced proximity. Like, all right, we're here, we're stuck together, we're gonna talk. I grabbed these two out of classes. Like, honestly, I say just be yourself, and I'm not dissing anyone. Like, I get the social anxiety, and if you can't, you can't. You know what? Your extrovert will find you. I have a friend that collects them like Pokemons.
What type are you? Fairy.
If you're willing to get outside your comfort zone, I say start up a small conversation with someone, and sometimes you find your little weirdos, like, that, like, match your energy, and if they don't...
I
They'll deserve
actually,
your energy.
on God, I actually want to talk a bit about like how college is really like meant for neurotypical people and not neurodivergent.
Oh my God, it's so real.
And like one of the ways that I would say this is a big one I've noticed. In-person classes are not nearly as accessible as people may think they are. Like there's obviously like if you have like maybe a physical disability, but even if you're just like for me, it is exhausting to wake up, to get ready, to just go to a 1 hour 15 lecture, even 2, and then come home. That takes so much energy and time for me, but by the time I'm home, I'm like, all right, we're done for the day, boys. We've done it. Good job, squad. My brain cells are all like dead. I actually find asynchronous learning a lot better. Like, obviously this is not for everyone, but I find asynchronous learning a lot better for me because I can just look at that content and be like, yeah, I get it, and then do the assignment and be like, cool, and then move on, instead of having to, like, brush my hair and wake up and, like, you know, do the whole shebang of looking like a, you know, normal person instead of, like, a ragged cryptid going to class.
That's so interesting, because I disagree.
Really?
Well, for me personally.
For you, yeah.
Me too.
Yeah, see? Okay, because, I will say, getting up to go to class is so difficult. Thankfully, most days I have work before class, because as much as I also don't want to go to work, I feel more sense of, like, accountability and responsibility to go. Yeah, like, they're paying me. I, like, made a commitment versus I'm paying my school. Yeah. Like, I should be able to not want to go if I don't want to. And that moment of, like, I feel like a big thing, structure-wise, is that college loses its, what's the word? Authority. Right? Yeah. Because, not only, like, by law, I had to go to high school. My parents had to make sure I went. The teachers had more authority over, like, you can't be on your phone. And you were, right? You know, you're a kid, so, like, you know, someone calls your mom and is like, she's skipping. Mom comes and beats you. Mind you, my mom still does that. Yeah. No, she don't know. No, I'm kidding. But then in college, like, I'm in a lecture hall with 200 classes. She can't see me on my phone. Yeah. Nor what can she do about it? Or, like, you sleep through class one morning, it's like, what? I'll just study a little extra harder for the exam, or, you know, I'll take the points. You know, my mom no longer gets that call, like, calling from so-and-so high school. Yeah. Your child was not in class today. Yeah. You know, it doesn't happen. So, it loses a lot of accountability. But for me, at least in person, still holds a little bit of authority to me, I think. Because I'm like, I have to see the teacher. Like, I have to face her, or, like, a lot of times they take, like, participation. No, I actually want to touch on that because I actually think participation grades are not very accessible. I understand that, like, teachers want their students to attend and all that, but, like, if you want your students to attend, I feel like you should have an engaging class. I agree. Or at least a class that is, like, there's only so many ways you can make the calculus engaging, but you go there because you know you need to learn the material for the big exams. But, like, other classes that are more, like, kind of liberal arts or humanities, if you don't have an engaging class and your work is easy, that's not on the students if they want to basically just do it asynchronous. If they want to be there, they'll go. I also think they're paying the university. They're paying you. You don't. I feel like it's inaccessible to try and attach a grade, because what if someone's sick? And then they're like, well, then you can get an excused absence only if you get a doctor's note. Most people don't go to the doctor when they get a cold or even, like, a fever, even the flu. Like, if I got the flu and I knew it was the flu and, like, not COVID or something like that, like, before COVID came around especially, I wasn't going to the doctor unless I was, like, in such pain that it was concerning, or, like, so sick that I was like, this isn't, you know, like, just a flu. I was not going to the doctor. So, like, you weren't getting me out of this bed. I would die rot in here. You should not, like, people be like, well, it's just a cold. You should not have to go to class when you have a cold, in my opinion. Spreading all your germs everywhere, being nasty. My other thing is that, like, sometimes they put so much weight on participation, they're so willing to be flexible. I at least respect the teachers that are like, you have a few days, like, a few absences with, like, no questions asked. Yeah. Because there's no reason, like, I missed one class for one day. It was like 2 classes, but I only missed one day of both of them because they were on the same day, and it dropped one of my grades so low. Like, is that the one that you had to drop? No. Okay. that was more on my authority because like Christian was saying, I would input that like, what if I didn't do this discussion post? And then I stopped inputting it, and I just kept not doing discussion
love that
posts.
feature canvas. Please get rid of it. It's unhealthy.
It's bad for me.
It's an addiction at this point. No, but I just was not able to hold myself accountable to do like those discussion posts and things, and I was just like,
Can I spit game real quick?
Yes, spit game.
So I got some advice for y'all that struggle with similar issues that Izzy and I face. Number one, make sure you go to every single class. I had one full semester where I did this, and I felt like a superhero. I felt amazing. And this semester, I started doing that. And then the second I skipped one class, it became an issue again. Like, I just started feeling immediate no motivation. I guess if I'm just not like stuck in a rigid pattern, I just fall off the tracks real easy. Just hold yourself to it. Find a day to work on your homework too. Whether it's like a specific day of the week or if it shuffles around a little bit, at least have one day where you sit there, you look at everything, even if you don't want to, just stare at everything that you've got in the face, get it all done in one day. You'll feel so much better about it. I like going to Panera Bread and drinking a lot of caffeine. Off the record, caffeine is a hell of a drug.
Be careful.
Be careful with it, but it has its benefits, you know what I'm saying?
Because for me, that lack of routine, I feel like is one of my biggest problems, but I'm so bad at creating a routine, mostly because it has to be perfect. Like, if it's not perfect, if it's not consistent, it's done.
You need to be that girl.
Yeah, kind of. Like, I can, like, if I had the routine set up, I can usually follow patterns pretty well, but once we hit a point where it's like, this one thing in the routine is off, the entire routine is off. Like, that's it. There is no.
I can't even lie. There's been some days I've driven to campus ready to go to my 11 a.m. and I sat in my car for like 75 minutes and I did not get out and skip my class. It's been some days like that before.
Speaking that, I will say this too. So I was talking a little bit about how I think participation can be really inaccessible, and I definitely think it is because it's just like, you know, if you're just also like, even what if you're having like a mental health day and you just need to skip a class. But
Took
honestly,
a lot of those back in the day.
Yeah. Christian, you good, homie? I think another thing that's really inaccessible, I think more inaccessible than participation, is people who dock you for being late.
Oh,
I think you should still get credit for participation even if you show up like as long as it's before like halfway before the class is done, as long as it's like you still have half of the class left, because there have been a few times that the only reason I went to class is because I allowed myself to be like 20-30 minutes late, but at least I still went for half of it, and like that's better than nothing. But if there's like a late penalty, at that point it's like, especially when they'd be like, I remember there were some classes that were like, we have a attendance policy that is in the first 5 minutes of class, so if you're not there by then, you're getting marked off for attendance no matter what. Then it's like, cool, so if I'm 5 minutes late, I'm just not going. Why would I do that then? And some people might be like, well, for the content, and it's just like, almost out of spite at that point, I'm not gonna lie. I'm just like, fine, you're gonna mark me absent, I'll be absent then. So I really think late policies are like really, I understand that it can be, I guess, a little disruptive for students to walk in the middle of it, but usually people just go, okay, and then like go back to their stuff. And it really doesn't need to be a whole song and dance, I think.
I agree.
Again, if you're paying for the classes, like, you know, professors should set limits and boundaries, but like, you know, some days you're going to be late, some days you're going to have a bad morning, some days you're going to wake up, you know, sleep past an alarm or something, might need a mental health day, might, you know, might be sick, like, you never know. So, because there were a few times, like, there were times that I nearly had to go into a class with, like, full-on COVID, because they were like, well, we don't have a doctor's note yet, and I was like, I know I have COVID.
Okay, this is kind of off topic, kind of is, but on the, like, teacher policies, do you guys ever wish you had, like, I don't think you, I know you might have them, but, like, do you guys ever wish you had, like, accommodations, and do you actually think they would help you?
I actually don't have accommodations, and
Yeah, I didn't think so.
I regret. That's another thing I'm going to mention. If you are diagnosed, get accommodations. Do it for yourself. Peace and love. It's so good for you. I didn't. because of, there's a lot of stigma, I feel like, that students have in their own brain about having accommodations. Because you don't have to tell anyone. The only people who will know that you have accommodations are your professors and your, like, student accessibility, that's what ours is called, student accessibility services, but whatever yours is called. Like, your department that handles that stuff and your professors are the only people that have to know. You don't have to tell other students or anything like that. But I know a lot of people who, especially if you have, like, ADHD or autism, they'll be like, oh, I don't want to have accommodations because I don't want to take resources, or, you know, I feel like it makes me lazy. It doesn't. Like, they're there for this reason. But two, they're genuinely so helpful. So even though I am diagnosed, I never got accommodations because of that. I was like, I'll just stick it out. And now as I'm graduating, I probably will for when I get my master's degree, but I wish I had an undergrad, because a big thing about accommodations, especially if you have autism, is that you can get more excusals from class. You can get more, like, late, like, work, like, leniency. And that can be really good if, like, what if you have autistic burnout? Because if you have autistic burnout, that can be really crippling and you might need more time. Or what if you just, you know, aren't having the sensory day? Like, it's much more accommodating. So get accommodations.
And I'm not disagreeing with that. Accommodations are really helpful for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, I'm undiagnosed, so I have never had accommodations, nor at the point in my life where I ever will, considering how close I am to graduating. But honestly, I know this isn't for everyone, but I honestly kind of agree that it would make me, like, not lazy, but it wouldn't truly help me with the work, if that makes sense. Because I have a tendency to put things off. Like, part of mine is very much that until I feel that, like,
Urgency?
pressure, that urgency that something needs to
deadline?
get done, it is not getting done.
Oh, I had that one day. Now it's gone. And now I just let the assignments go away.
It drives the people around me crazy. Like, that's why I get called, like, lazy and everything for not doing things. I will literally, like, sit there on my phone, like, in a panic attack, distracting myself from it because I know I need to do an assignment, and still be like, the solidarity,
you know, there.
later, not right now. I use distraction. I'll read, I'll, like, watch something, and then, like, 10 p.m. hits, that 11:59 due date, and I'm like, all right,
we on it.
Time to knock out this 4-page essay.
I know a lot of college students, like, talk about, like, you know, wanting to be seen as, like, you know, a fellow peer, especially, like, if you have autism spectrum disorder or another neurodivergency. It can be really hard to feel like you can connect to your fellow college students. They talk about it in this article called "I Just Want Them to See Me as Me: Identity, Community, and Disclosure Practices Among College Students on the Autism Spectrum." And the article really talks about how a lot of college students really struggle with disclosing that they're autistic or being open about it, and because of the stigmas and because of how hard it is. I definitely really resonated with this article because I've also very much struggled I'm very openly autistic. I'm very much like, this is who I am. And I definitely know a lot of situations where that's, like, I wouldn't say got me in trouble, but made things harder for me. Another thing that, like, a lot of autistic students I know, like, struggle with is maintaining, like, really close interpersonal relationships, like romantic relationships. It's hard for some people who are neurodivergent to maintain close relationships, period, but romantic relationships can be really tricky, especially when you're in, like, college and it's, like, you know, things are really new. You're doing a lot of new things. So in the article of College Students with Autism Spectrum Disorders Experiences Maintaining Romantic Relationships, Counseling Implications, it talks about the way that counselors could kind of help autistic students who are struggling with romantic relationships. But in general, I think it offers a lot of insight in general about, like, how hard it can be to maintain, like, a romantic relationship or close relationships in general when your brain just functions differently. I know it was really hard for me when I started going into college of, like, it just felt like no one was on the same page as me. It felt like I would talk to people and there was just this invisible wall there that I didn't know why it was there, and there was no way to get through it. So
yeah. And as a quick add-on, like, speaking of interpersonal relationships, we've all, like, felt that struggle of, like, we're bad at texting back or reading social cues or things like that. And a lot of people get really put off by that. I promise you, my entire friend group is like this. Yeah. And when I tell you no one is upset when we, like, don't text, I only text my ride or dies when I like have plans set. We exclusively communicate through sending them random TikToks. I have not talked to my best friend in probably months just because of our schedule. I only messaged her because I want to do a movie night. And we picked up like nothing. It was like, oh my god, yes, I want to do that. So find your people. Little PSA. They're out there.
Yeah, I have a group now that's very supportive, and we're all also mainly on the like spectrum as well. So, you know, if your college has a club for people with like ADHD or autism, and they might have a diagnosis barrier, which is a separate issue, but even if they don't, like, try to join if you can, because it can be really great to meet other people like you, and I highly recommend that. So,
and your personal accommodations and boundaries are to be respected. They're valid. Like, I know what my best friend would want to go to with, like, which would set off her like anxiety and everything. So keep those friends in mind.
We hope you guys enjoyed this episode. So we're going to be ending off the episode with a interview with Brianna Barnes-Harrington, who is a practicing psychiatrist working at the USF Counseling Center, who specializes in promoting mindfulness and healthy coping strategies and has worked with many neurodivergent students. And I've actually had her as a counselor before, and she's pretty good. So we're going to roll that clip.
Alrighty, welcome back. We're here with Dr. Brianna Barnes-Harrington, a licensed psychologist working with the University of South Florida. Horns up. And we got a couple questions today for you. Starting off, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Very good to hear. We're both doing all right, hanging in there.
All right, so I'm going to kick us off with the first question. So the first question we have for you today is, what is your work like with neurodivergent students here at USF, and kind of how do you support them and go about your day?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So at the Counseling Center, we kind of work within a short-term model, since that's what our capacity and ability is able to provide for students. And so with neurodivergent students in particular, a lot of times we're kind of looking at goals that are short-term focused. And so kind of those things that are behavioral strategies and changes that students might be wanting to make. So time management, consistency, taking medication, improving focus, concentration, working on study strategies. How do we do self-care regularly? How do we get enough sleep? How do we start tasks? Things like that. And so what that looks like then is kind of just being really specific about our goals, and then also kind of exploring what are different strategies that we can use to make changes around those areas and kind of providing support that we can. Non-behaviorally related things are also kind of thinking about, like, what are negative thoughts that we have about ourselves, kind of processing feelings of guilt and shame that come around being neurodivergent, especially if our brain is working differently than other people. Maybe we don't feel like we're meeting expectations, or we put a lot of pressure on ourselves. And so kind of figuring out how can we change some of the way that we're thinking about ourselves and reacting to ourselves. And some of that also comes from like different messages that we've internalized from society. And so kind of working on how do we not put that also onto ourselves and internalize it, but kind of be able to see that we're not lazy, we're not able to do things, but more so our brain just works differently, and how can we kind of reframe that to make it so we can kind of work with ourselves within a system that isn't necessarily built for us as well. And so that's kind of what the gist of that looks like. I didn't know if you have anything more specific around kind of the type of work, or that feels sufficient.
Excellent.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, and actually to go a little deeper into it, I would say, what challenges do you notice that neurodivergent students tend to like struggle with the most, and how do the universities and people like yourself go about accommodating that a little bit more specifically in the day-to-day?
Yeah, definitely. Well, so I feel like it still runs the gamut of different things that we might encounter that are stressful, that are kind of difficult to deal with. But in particular, I think especially coming into school, adjustment, change, kind of dealing with the differences that there are between like high school and coming into college in particular. And so that can relate to like setting up a routine and managing a schedule, but also like dealing with like low motivation. How do we get work done? How do we keep ourselves organized? Like I mentioned, that sense around negative self-esteem. A lot of times there's a a higher comorbidity with neurodivergence and ADHD, that we're experiencing more anxiety, more depression that we'll see. And so sometimes it's kind of figuring out, how do we manage anxiety? How do we manage depression? And also, just by treating any neurodivergence or ADHD that we have, that might be what is helpful in actually solving the anxiety and depression versus if we were just trying to solve those on their own. And then a lot of what we then work on and how that kind of correlates into our work is like, what are time management strategies? What are things we can do to manage stress? How do we cope with these different stresses? And then I mentioned consistency before. Some of that is like, how do I build a schedule? And then how do I also make myself accountable to keeping up with that schedule, to getting these things done? Because it's really easy, I think, for any students to say, okay, these are my goals, but how do I actually make sure that I do them? Because when it's our own deadline, sometimes it's also really easy to not do the goal, to not do the thing. So yeah, accountability is a big part of like, then it's just how do we break things down so it doesn't feel so overwhelming. And so what our work looks like is, how do we break things into small chunks? How do we change our thinking about all of these things feeling so overwhelming? So an example that I might use is, if we're neurotypical, we might think, oh, I just have to get up and go to class. But if we're neurodivergent, or even if we're dealing with depression or anxiety, things that are still impacting our executive functioning, it's not, oh, I have to just get up and go to class. It's, I have to wake up, I have to get out of bed, I have to wash my face, brush my teeth, find clothes, get things together. And so all of these little steps then become overwhelming. And so taking that picture and thinking about, how do I make that feel more simple and acknowledge that each of these little things is its own task, so it doesn't have to feel so overwhelming, and noticing like that difference of even just how I think versus maybe how others might see it kind of shows us what creates that difference, and why am I starting my day and it's feeling so much more stressful than my friend who doesn't seem too worried about getting up and going to class. And so a lot of that is like changing around our mindset and how we're thinking and reframing some of our thoughts. And then also figuring out what's the most doable routine for myself. So kind of starting with, where am I at now, and observing what that looks like. And then also, what's my ideal, and then what are the small changes I can make to getting there. So maybe right now I get up at 11, and then on days where I have class, I get up at like 8:55 to get there by 9:15. What might we do then to kind of slowly get up 30 minutes earlier over time to then meet the ideal schedule of getting up at 8? And so kind of really working to break it into small pieces that then feel doable and not overwhelming, and also setting like realistic goals. So it also reduces the feeling of overwhelm that there is. I think that's kind of really a big piece of it. And then also just learning different coping strategies and figuring out what helps me feel less anxious or less stressed. I know a lot of times there's frustration around, well, I'm told to just use a planner. And part of the issue is, well, if you're not going to use it, it's not going to be helpful. So what are the tools that you're going to use that will be helpful? Is it setting reminders and alarms on your phone, and kind of using technology to our advantage? Or even like, I have a web browser app that I'll share with some students if distraction's a challenge. And so it's kind of, if we want to go to a different page and we're trying to do homework, we can have it turned on and it will say, do you want to procrastinate right now? And that kind of lets us take a pause. And so it's really helpful to know, because then we're like, okay, do I want to be distracted? Do I want to procrastinate? And it just makes us pause and take a minute to think. And then, like with neurodivergence, it's a lot of learning how to practice over time, and then also trying not to get frustrated with ourselves. So trying to know, this is just going to take me a little bit more time, and it's small steps that are doable that I can create that change over time too. And then not feeling like there's that guilt or that blame or those negative thoughts about ourselves and the challenges that we might have that other folks aren't having as well too. So a lot of it is kind of, how do we set up a planner and a schedule? Then also, how do I actually use this planner and this schedule, or whatever tool might be most useful to myself? And so in college counseling, we try to really focus on like those smaller changes that we can make. And then it also might be, do you have an official diagnosis? Would it be helpful to have an official diagnosis? In universities, I guess I can't speak broadly, but at USF, if we were going to look for accommodations, you'd have to go through testing for ADHD. And so a or even like being on the autism spectrum, things like that. And so there's some things that our neuropsych department can provide, and it's more cost effective for students, or we might look at community referrals. But we might mostly talk about that if we do want accommodations, and that would be helpful to us. But if we're a senior, we're graduating soon, we might just kind of go through some different screeners, figure out strategies for managing your symptoms. And if you don't need accommodations for school, maybe it's kind of finding different providers that can help with medication if you're interested in medication, or like kind of continuing treatment moving forward too. But having some of those conversations and seeing what's really most going to be helpful for each person is a part of like what that process looks like in the system too.
Yeah, that was really interesting. Great. I felt really called out as someone without a diagnosis. I was like, you were listing some of those habits. I was like, definitely do some of those. I know personally a lot of like some of the ways I force myself is like waking up, which is like I do go through my little tasks. I'm like, okay, I got to do my hair. I gotta like get dressed. I was like, I sometimes set my alarm for like 30 minutes before I actually need to get up to give myself that like wake up time and be like, okay, I'm gonna read or like scroll on my phone for a little bit. That way by the time I gotta actually get dressed, I'm like, okay, got this.
I felt called out with the planner. I spent like $12 on like the fanciest looking beautiful planner, and I never used it. It just sat on my desk collecting dust.
I got a few of those somewhere hidden in this room.
I think that is so relatable. I certainly can relate to both of those experiences, and that idea around like, if it's not helpful to us, we're not going to use it. But like you mentioned too, like that, what works for me, if it's setting an alarm 30 minutes early, that's great. With my folks with neurodivergence, if people are open to it, I'm a big proponent of alarms, like, and alarms with multiple times. So an hour beforehand, 30 minutes beforehand, and then for different tasks that we have too, because that's just a good way of kind of reminding us, especially if we have time blindness. And so keeping track of time is not going to be something that we're just naturally inclined to doing. It's just really helpful to set up systems that work for us, like something loudly telling us, hey, it's time to do the things.
And just addressing this, the kind of core of our project is one of the UN's, I believe it's 19 global goals. We're focusing on the third one, health and well-being. How do you think that what you are doing as a licensed psychologist working with the university promotes health and well-being?
That's a great question. I think it's kind of the core of health and well-being, just in the sense of kind of, in particular, trying to make sure that there's attention and awareness on the fact that we have these different struggles or these different differences, and figuring out how we can attend to them. So like, how do we take care of ourselves physically, mentally, emotionally, and like, how's that going to help us feel better as a person, do better as a person, be successful in our goals and our strategies? And so in therapy, that's really our goal. Like my foundation with anybody I'm working with is like, what's our basic self-care? Are we eating? Are we moving? Are we drinking water? Are we getting enough sleep? And that's kind of our baseline. And most of the time we're not, especially because our basic self-care is at least 8 things that we need to do every day. That is really hard to get to. But so even just promoting and talking about mental health, or seeing students, or going to outreach events on campus and sharing some of that information, and just the information of resources, or meeting with students and being able to say, hey, what are some small things we can get in place for you? Ideally is going to be able to lead to them having a healthier, more fulfilled life. So.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing. You had provided ample amount of like effective strategies when dealing with time management. Do you have any concrete strategies you typically share with people about managing stress?
Yeah, definitely. Well, so for every person, of course, it really varies. And a part of it is just figuring out, again, what's going to work for you. But I think that, well, managing time is a big piece of managing stress, especially since that often causes a lot of anxiety that some folks with ADHD and neurodivergence have, is either we're always late or we're always early because we're scared of being late. But also doing relaxation exercises, mindfulness, which a lot of times I know my ADHD folks do give me pushback on, but it's not that we need to clear our mind and not have any thoughts. It's more so we're kind of practicing the skill of being present. And so mindfulness can be really helpful in helping us just slow down and be in the present moment, and reduce some of those like racing thoughts, or being all over in our thought patterns and kind of being more with trying to keep up with where we're at in the moment. That, and then the basic self-care. So like making sure we're exercising and getting movement, nutrition, seeing friends or talking to people, doing something nice for ourselves each day, even making sure that we take time just to do something, even if that's 10 minutes reading before bed or taking a break watching a show, and balancing that self-care between things that we want to do and things that we need to do. So like if it's, have you all heard of the Pomodoro technique at all for like studying?
I have not, no.
Well, so it's really helpful in like managing our time, but it's essentially you study for a certain period of time and take a break for a certain period of time, and allows you to have longevity without as much fatigue for your brain in that time period that you're studying for. And so one way that we can make our breaks productive and give us a break from the work that we're doing is to do something else that's like maybe a chore. So it could be really quickly, if we know that having our space cluttered makes us more stressed, how can I do 10 to 15 minutes of that either during one of those breaks? So if I do, usually it's like 25 minutes working, 5 minutes break, or 45, 15, something like that around your hours. Then maybe I'll do 45 minutes reading, and then 15 minutes, I'm going to get up and walk around and like pick up the different things that are cluttered, put them where that they go. And so kind of doing those small things to maintain our space or whatever it is that brings us stress, and kind of having a balance between how we can have that as a routine too. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. That sounds very helpful. So we've got one last question for you. How do you think that neurotypical people can begin to understand neurodivergent people better?
I feel like that's a great question. And in this moment, I think when I read that question, my thought was, I wish I was a neurotypical person so I could answer that better from that perspective. But I think also then coming from the perspective of someone who's also been in the neurodivergent community, it might be more apt to kind of share what that experience is like, and kind of having that advice. But I think kind of really, especially just if neurotypical folks can maybe think about the fact that no one is making a choice to be a certain way. Oftentimes it's just that we're having different difficulties and different struggles, and that our brain works differently, and kind of being open to understanding that perspective. So I know that there can be misinformation on social media and online, but I think there's also a lot of great content of people explaining what their experiences are like. And so just listening to people who share about their experiences and being open to hearing how they're different than yours would be, I think is a really great place to be able to start. Also, like not being mean or thinking that people are just lazy, but understanding that other folks' brains just work differently would be a helpful thing to consider and to be mindful of, and trying to understand. And then sometimes what I talk about when I mentioned that, trying to destigmatize how our brain works differently. Also, even thinking about just everything about humans comes from a place of evolution. And so there was a purpose. And at some point, when we're back in times of being hunters and gatherers or what have you, like different traits were more effective for different, positions that you might hold. And so the ADHD brain and the neurodivergent brain has evolved and exists because it serves a purpose and was very helpful and beneficial at some point in time. And just because it doesn't maybe necessarily align with how society has decided to evolve now, doesn't necessarily mean that it isn't effective and have really important purposes that still is really relevant and important too. And so some of that takes away some stigma too, because I know we talk a lot about like difficulties with sleep in a different I just forgot the word, but our body clock, essentially.
Yeah.
And so a lot of folks that are neurodivergent kind of are up later and sleep later. And part of that is because at some point in time, somebody needed to be awake when other people were sleeping and able to kind of keep watch and make sure that people were going to be able to be safe. And so if we're able to think about how our brain works differently and the purposes it served before, it kind of allows us to work a little bit more with it and adjust versus feeling like we're trying to change something that maybe doesn't need to be changed as well. And so I think having that perspective and thinking about the benefits versus all of the negatives or the things that are challenging with other people would be very helpful to the neurodivergent community.
Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing. Are there any closing thoughts you'd like to disclose before we wrap this interview up?
I think I just appreciate what y'all are doing in your project, and I appreciate you reaching out to me as well. I'm so happy to help and to share information, and hopefully it will be something that other folks are able to listen to your series and connect with or relate with and find some assistance in that piece too. So,
Well, thank you so much
Thank
for your time and for working with us. We greatly appreciate your participation and your input.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Definitely.
Some great insights.
I'm glad. Have a good rest of your day.
Have a great rest of your day. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
All right, everyone. We hope you enjoyed this video and this interview. And as always, stay spicy. Where are your finger guns?